The 2024 NFL season is 5 weeks in, and there have been some very big surprises so far, both good and bad. I don't think anybody saw the Commanders playing this well this early in Jaden Daniels' career, and a big congratulations to them as it's been a long time since they've been relevant. And on the opposite side of this, I think a lot of people would have been surprised that the Cincinnati Bengals are 1-4 through 5 games and have looked bad at times through the first month and change. And in today's video, we're going to discuss some of the biggest realities of the 2024 NFL season so far. There will be a couple of good situations discussed and a few not so good situations discussed, and like always, we will break down the team's current situation, the long-term outlook, what they realistically can do this season, and everything in between. And this is a video I am very excited to dive into, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video with one of the biggest realities so far, and it's that the Los Angeles Rams need to rebuild. They are 1-4 after a loss to the Green Bay Packers in Week 5, and I know not every team is dealt the same hand of cards entering the season, especially when it pertains to injury, but the Rams were always going to be in an uphill battle even if they were healthy. This team lost in the wildcard round of the playoffs to the Lions last year and entered the 2024 season with deep postseason aspirations. The Rams ran the ball really well in 2023 as they finished top 12 in every major rushing category, and they had 10 games in which they ran for over 100 yards as a team. If you recall, the Rams went 7-1 in the final 8 games of the 2023 season to finish with a 10-7 record despite starting the year 3-6. And not surprisingly, most of those 100-yard games came during the back half of the 2023 season. Through 5 games, the Rams have ran for 100 yards twice, and surprisingly, they are 0-2 in those games, which were losses to the Bears and Packers. The main reason I think they should commit to a rebuild is because I like a lot of the young players on this roster, but the main problem is I don't think they have enough to seriously compete and to try and get back to a second Super Bowl in 4 years, and I think the Rams internally think that too. They, of course, can't outright say it, but I do believe their draft selections and free agent signings along the trenches show that they want to have the foundation for tomorrow's roster, and I mean this by selecting players like Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, and Steve Avila in the top 2 rounds in each of the last 2 drafts. I absolutely loved the Jared Verse selection when it was made, as I thought he had a very high floor as a player, and at minimum, the Rams would be getting a really solid pass rusher that can consistently push the pocket and be a 6 to 8 sack guy per year, and this is at minimum, by the way. I was not the biggest Braden Fisk fan in the 2024 draft admittedly, but Braden has played solid through the first 5 games, and they look like they have 2 solid starters along the defensive line over the next few years. The main problem with the Rams isn't Matt Stafford himself, it's that he's 36 years old and not going to improve and be the player he was a couple of years ago, even 7 or 8 years ago. He didn't have his best game against the Packers, and players are going to have down games, but this is much bigger than a single game in which one of their touchdowns was a walk-in pick 6 that we can call what it is, should have never happened. This team reminds me a lot of the Vikings in their final year with Kirk Cousins, where they have a lot of good players, but it's not enough. I know Sean McVay is obviously one of the best coaches in the league, but it's not as simple as trying to find the next Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield and to go from there. And recently Sam had a bad game himself. I think the Rams are a good team when healthy and are certainly a top 7 team in the NFC, and I have no doubts a healthy 2024 Rams team could go to the playoffs and maybe even win a playoff game. But I don't think this is an elite team, and their secondary also has a ton of holes even when healthy. And this is why I think one of the biggest realities for the 2024 season is that the Rams need to rebuild, and now, because if they drag this along, then they could very easily be another run-of-the-mill team. We're on to Cincinnati to discuss the Bengals, and the situation here is ugly. The Bengals are now 1-4 after a 41-38 loss to the Ravens, and the Bengals' lone win in the 2024 season was against the Andy Dalton-led Panthers in Week 4. The reason why this situation is bad is because the Bengals have unintentionally cornered themselves, and they have one option to win football games, and that's for Joe Burrow to play at an MVP level and pray the defense shuts the opposing team down one more time that the Bengals' offense is shut down. Cincinnati has put up 105 points in the past 3 weeks and are 1-2 in those games. And the situation is also ugly in Cincinnati because this is a good football team that's now in a position where they don't have to win out, but there's very little margin for error. They play the Giants and Browns in each of the next 2 weeks, and they should improve to 3-4, although the Giants looked really good against Seattle, but Cincinnati has a lot of tough games down the stretch. They play the Ravens again, they go to LA to play the Chargers, they play the Steelers twice, and they go to Dallas too. And the end of the game sequence from the Bengals against the Ravens was awful as they were gifted a turnover by the Ravens, and they had the ball to start on Baltimore's 38-yard line. And to this point in the game, Joe Burrow was 30 of 39 for 392 yards and had 5 passing touchdowns. Jamar Chase proved time and time again that he is worth a very big contract and had 193 yards and 2 touchdowns, and they took the game out of their hands and ran the ball 3 times to attempt a 50-plus yard field goal. And I think that's a potential locker room altering loss, and that's in terms of guys believing in coaching and the leadership of the organization. I know the ball was bobbled on the attempt, but to assume a 50-plus yard field goal is automatic and that we have the game won is a bad thought process, and there's no way around it. Even if it's a prime Justin Tucker, I would prefer my team to try and get a first down and have it be a 43 or 44 yard field goal rather than have it be a 53 yarder when it didn't have to be. There is one thing I also worry about with the long-term outlook of the Bengals, and it's that they're going to stick with Zach Taylor for a long time. And the reason for that is Mike Brown, the Bengals owner, despite being a very wealthy person compared to the average man, is not rich compared to other NFL owners. Pro Football Network did an article on the NFL's richest owners in August, and Mike Brown was the only one estimated to not be a billionaire. The reason we bring this up is because an NFL team can make as many coaching changes as they want, as long as ownership is willing to pay. And I think this is a reason Marvin Lewis was the head coach of the Bengals long after he should have been fired. He was head coach of the Bengals from 2003 to 2018 and never won a playoff game. And having a high net worth does not translate to Mike Brown having $900 million in cash, and that's another reason why the stadium is now named Paycor Stadium, so that they can afford the big contracts for Joe Burrow and probably Jamar Chase in the near future. But I don't think they're going to fire Zach Taylor despite another inevitable postseason loss. So I think the Bengals are stuck where they are, which is a solid team that has a lot of flaws that starts with the coaching staff. And I know they're 1-4, but I do think they'll bounce back. And when you think about the Bengals' outlook, do you think they are winning 3 straight road playoff games just to get to the Super Bowl with this defense? Because I don't, and due in large part to this situation is not great. The Minnesota Vikings are now 5-0 after defeating the Jets in London with a score of 23-17, and I know the initial thought when you saw the thumbnail of today's video may have been that the Vikings are cursed and that there's no chance they'll actually go to the Super Bowl, but I didn't include Kevin O'Connell or Sam Darnold or even Justin Jefferson on the thumbnail for a reason. It was Brian Flores. And the biggest reality through the first month and change into the year is that this is a Super Bowl caliber defense. The Minnesota Vikings defense flat out makes offenses uncomfortable. They held the Giants to 6 points back in week 1, and after that game it was, well, it's a good start, but they play Daniel Jones, and the Giants may be selecting in the top 5 of the 2025 NFL Draft, so no big deal. The real test would come in the ensuing 4 weeks, as they play the 49ers, Texans, Packers, and Jets in 4 consecutive weeks. And to the surprise of everyone, even the most loyal Vikings fans, they won all of them. And a big reason for that has been the defense. It hasn't been just the defense, though, as Sam Darnold has played really good football for most of 2024 outside of one game, which was the most recent game against the Jets, and he did miss several throws in this game, but the defense prevailed. The Vikings defense has 2 touchdowns in 5 games, both of which were scored by Andrew Van Ginkel, and they also intercepted Aaron Rodgers 3 times in week 5. The Vikings' run defense has been terrific through 5 games too, and they've allowed 100 yards just once, which was back in week 2 against San Francisco, and a running back Jordan Mason. Being able to bring in guys like Andrew Van Ginkel, Blake Cashman, and Jonathan Grenard in free agency was critical because it allowed Brian Flores to really unleash the defense he wants to play. And when you have a defense that likes to blitz like Flores does, while also playing a lot of drop 8 coverage, which is exactly what it sounds like, rush 3 players and drop 8 into coverage, along with how fast the linebackers are and how quickly they can go sideline to sideline, this is a recipe for disaster for opposing offenses. The The Vikings have only played 2 games at US Bank Stadium through the first 5, and they allowed 24 total points to the 49ers and Texans. Not in each game, by the way, but total. The way the Vikings want you to beat them is to throw a lot of out routes or passes to the backs in the flat, which is very frustrating to try and methodically beat a team with 12 or 13 play drives because it's what the defense is giving you. There's not a lot of windows in coverage aside from the cover 2 hole shots Jordan Love was hitting in week 4, and that was the lone 400-yard game the Vikings have allowed through the first 5. They played Detroit in week 7, and that's going to be an insanely difficult game because the Lions have no weaknesses offensively. And that's going to be one hell of a chess match between Ben Johnson and Brian Flores. Minnesota's schedule was brutal through the first 7 games, and at minimum they will exit the first 7 with a 5-2 record. Their schedule lightens up a bit after that, and there is a reality where this team can win 12 or 13 games due to a combination of the defense and the offense simply not turning the football over. And if the Vikings can do that, as in not turn the ball over, they can go a long way. And it starts with the Brian Flores defense. The Pittsburgh Steelers are done, and this is not an overreaction to the 20-17 loss against the Dallas Cowboys in Week 5, and it's also not me sitting here waiting to take a victory lap about Justin Fields, thinking that he's not a top 3 or 4 quarterback in the AFC. Now, Justin didn't have his best game against the Cowboys, but he had a couple of good games to start the year, and the game against Indy in Week 4 was a really good game. But there is a lot more wrong with this team than Justin Fields simply not being in the Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Lamar category of quarterbacks in the conference. They have one really big problem, and I mean really big problem, and it's wide receiver George Pickens. There was a 2-minute clip tweeted by Warren Sharp after the game on Sunday night where George Pickens was dogging routes, and I'm not going to justify dogging a single route, but if you are running a clear out route and you have done your job, and because you are the threat that George Pickens is, and you have a corner and a safety that you take out, and if you get 20 yards down the field and both of those guys are with you and you're clearly not going to be targeted because again you are the clear out route, if you slow down 20 yards into the route, I'm not advocating for that, but that's understandable in a situation like that. But there was a 2-minute clip of George half routes, and that's unacceptable. And I know George is a very, very talented player. Obviously, all the Steelers Nation does. But this has been a problem really since he's been drafted. This isn't something that just came up in the past week. The attitude was always a problem, and now we're seeing it in a big, big way. And one of the reasons why I think the Steelers are done is because if Mike Tomlin gets fed up with George and basically benches him and says, "We know you're talented, but we're not going to deal with this type of attitude," who do they have to actually throw the ball to? And I am recording this on Tuesday morning, a couple of days after the Steelers-Cowboys game, so if the Steelers trade for Davante Adams and they bring him in, that would be a different situation, although, full transparency, I don't think they're going to. But there was a quote from Pat Freiermuth after the game, and Pat said something along the lines of, "I am going to give full effort every single play. That's what leaders do. Even when I'm not targeted, I'm going to give full effort for the benefit of my teammates. That's what leaders do. That's what good teammates do." That goes to show where a lot of people are in this locker room with George Pickens. Now, it's not just a George Pickens problem either. The Steelers were outgained by over 200 yards against Dallas, and it was nearly doubled, or Dallas nearly doubled their offensive output, which that is going to be a problem. But the Steelers' run game, due to Najee Harris not being a great running back and the offensive line being banged up early in the year, is also going to be a problem for this team moving forward. And I know the Steelers started 3-0, and good for them. Do not apologize ever for being 3-0, but the back half of their schedule is insanely difficult, and they dropped from 3-0 to 3-2, and even when they were 3-0, the way that they won those games has been very Pittsburgh Steelers wins over the past couple of years, and the recipe really since the 2020-2021 season has been the same. Maybe outside of the one game where they absolutely killed Cleveland back in 2020 by 30 points, but we're talking 1, maybe 2 games in a span of 4 or 5 years where it's very much, let's put up maybe 17, 20 points, hold the team to 13 or 14 points, and really hope that the defense comes through and that we can somehow, some way win this game. And they couldn't win the game against Dallas. And I think what was even more frustrating about that was they didn't have Micah Parsons, they didn't have DeMarcus Lawrence, Marshawn Nealon got hurt in the game, and Dallas was down several players along the defensive line, including one of the best players in the league in Micah Parsons, and all you could put up was a little over 200 yards on offense and 17 total points. I also don't think Najee Harris is a great back, and I think Najee is the epitome of, hey coach, if you need 3 yards, I'll get you 3 yards, and if you need 5 yards, I'll get you 3 yards. I don't think they're going to extend Najee, and he's only averaging 3.3 yards per carry through the first 5 games. I mean, guys, he has 270 rushing yards on 82 carries to start the year. He is not the solution long-term at the running back position. And the reality is the Steelers' offense, outside of a couple of players, James Daniels is having one heck of a year, by the way, and credit where that's due, especially for the lack of recognition that he gets. But when you look at this team's weapons, are they going to be able to compete with anybody? No, and that was a question that I had entering the year. And now that we have a big attitude problem with George Pickens that is stemming in all across the locker room, by the way, the teammates are fed up with it, I don't see any way or any good way out of this situation, even if they bring in Devontae Adams, because I don't think he's ever going to be in the upper echelon of quarterbacks, which kind of puts us back to where we were last year. We have a good defense, we have maybe a good player or two in offense, but when push comes to shove, we're not going to be able to score enough points to be able to outduel any of the premier AFC teams. So regardless of what the Steelers do this year, I think at maximum they are going to be a wild card round exit, and that's just because they don't have the horses on offense to consistently go after teams, and they have to play such a specific style of football to even win a game. They won the turnover battle against Dallas 3-0, and it was technically 3-1 as they fumbled on the lateral toss around on the very final play of the game. And they also blocked a field goal. And if you win the turnover battle, again, I'll say 3-0, although technically it was 3-1, and you block a field goal and you lose at home, that says a lot about where you are as a team, and I very much think the Steelers are done. But that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe as we are closing in on 160k subs, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. So hopefully you guys enjoyed, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.